So I've come out here this morning to demonstrate how to do a panoramic picture. And before I take this picture, the lighting is very tricky, it's a bit dark here in the woods, but before I take it I'll just show you through the camera, through the video here, what we're looking at. Now, before we take the panorama, we have to set our camera up correctly. And to do a panorama, your camera must be in manual mode. However, you could start with aperture priority. Now, because it's quite dark here today, I've chosen an aperture of f4, which really isn't enough for a landscapey type picture. You'd prefer to have an f8. But because it's quite dark here, I'm on 800 ISO at f4. And if I take a picture and make sure the exposure is pretty much correct, then I'm taking a picture at a 60th of a second. So I'm happy with how the pictures come out at a 60th of a second. So now what I've done is my aperture is set at f4. I'm now going to move my shutter speed to a 60th of a second, and my ISO is on 800. Make sure your ISO is not on automatic or it will go up and down as well. The reason for that is that as we go through this scene, there will be different exposures for different parts of the picture. And if the camera changes exposure, as it will want to do if it's in any of the automatic settings, then you will see the joins in your pictures because they'll be exposed differently. So we have to set it so that nothing can move. The other thing we have to set is the focus point. So I'm going to focus over here on the hut over here. Whoops, I didn't mean to take that picture. Once I'm focused, I'm now switching off my autofocus, so the camera is now in manual focus. Now if you're somebody who uses the back button focus, then you don't need to worry about it. Just focus on one thing and then lock the focus. So we've locked the focus, we've locked the shutter speed, we've locked the ISO, and we've locked the aperture. Everything is going to be the same. And the one other thing is that I'm taking these pictures at about 28mm lens, and between 23 and 35, so let's say about 28mm, and that mustn't change either, so you mustn't zoom the lens while you're taking the pictures. Okay, so that's the camera setup. The last thing then is to take the pictures in portrait mode. The reason for that is that if you take them this way in landscape, inevitably you are going to have to crop some of the top and some of the bottom of these pictures when they're put together, because there's a natural kind of perspective issue. So you will lose some of the top and some of the bottom. So you'll still get a panoramic picture and it would work in this situation, but you will lose some of the top and bottom, so you'll end up with a very narrow panorama. Whereas if you do it this way, you have more picture captured top and bottom. So if you do have to lose some of the top or some of the bottom, you're still going to have enough picture to give you a nice proportion when you put the picture together. Okay, everything is locked, so all I need to do is take the pictures. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and we're complete. Now, just important to, while you're doing the pictures, it is important that you stop between each picture. So, you know, don't go like this and go too quick, or you'll end up with movement. You need to go 1, move and stop, and take the next picture, and so on until you have your panorama completed. The sun is actually trying to break through, and it's creating some nice lighting in front of us. But it's also quite difficult to get the exposure right because it's so bright and so dark. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and use the new feature in Lightroom that allows us to make a panorama and a HDR photograph at the same time. So a HDR photograph simply means we're going to take one picture that's 2 stops overexposed, one picture that's 2 stops underexposed, and one picture that's correctly exposed. And the computer will put those 3 pictures together to get the right exposure between them, and will also at the same time do the panorama. So the only difference is that as I take the pictures this time, I will be taking 3 pictures every time I press the button. I've used the bracketing feature on my camera. I'm starting off with a shutter speed of 250th of a second because it's a little bit brighter than it was a few minutes ago, and there's lovely light coming through the trees. So at 250th of a second, so then it'll go to 1000th of a second, and it'll go down to 60th of a second, and hopefully that'll allow us to get to capture all the tones that we see here. So here we go, 3 pictures on each press. Done. Okay, we'll see you when you're processing the pictures. So here we are in Lightroom, and here are the pictures that we took this morning of the scene in the forest here in Kilchma. And I've decided that the picture we're going to process is the one that we did the HDR for. So there are 3 pictures for each photograph. Okay, so if we look at this one here, this is the first one of the hut, and you can see this here is the correctly exposed picture, this is the overexposed picture, and this one is the underexposed picture. Okay, so that means that there are a total of 27 pictures because there were 9 photographs taken to complete the scene. So there are actually 24 pictures taken. Now, because it's a HDR, we're not going to do any adjusting to the photographs because that only gets done after HDR is made. So quite simply, we've highlighted those 27 pictures and we go up to the word photo, and then now this is only available in the new version of Lightroom, so if you want to do this you'll have to download the new version. But we go to photo merge, and the options that currently exist in Lightroom are HDR and or Panorama. But now we have the option of doing both at the same time. So I'm going to click this button here, and we are asking it to do HDR, which means combining those 3 photographs and then joining all the photographs together. I'm actually going to untick the, it's not going to tick, it's already started. So, but we're on auto crop, so it should come up at the right size. Now this is going to take a long time. So I'm just going to speed this up for you, and I'll actually pause the video at this point and we'll start it up again when it reaches the end. Okay, so it has now created the panorama. It's done a very good job. It took 6 minutes. I'm actually going to switch off the create stack here because that'll just make it a bigger file. So all I need to do now is say merge, and this could take another few minutes. Okay, so there we can see our completed panorama. It took another 8 minutes to process after we press merge. And if I just close these off, we might be able to see it a bit better on the wider screen. I think that's fairly impressive in terms of what the computer has managed to do, because it has worked out the exposures very well. It's still a little bit bright at the top, but I like the contrast in the shadows and everything, so I think that's pretty good. Now we could process that still further, so if we take it into develop and see what we can do. And basically we'll do as we normally do. Okay, so let's change it to the vivid and see what that looks like. So we've got the vivid. Now we're a little bit bright up here, but let's just do as we would normally do. So we take the highlights back. Perfect. We'll take the shadows up. Perfect, and then we'll bring the whites back, and we don't need to bring them back too far because they're already there. And we'll bring them blacks back a little bit more, and I think that looks pretty good. We could maybe increase the exposure a tiny, overdo it a tiny little bit. Okay, which might allow us to actually take the blacks down a little bit further, because that'll just bring out those shadows nicely. And there's a lot of texture in this, so we'll give it plenty of texture, a little bit of clarity, a little bit of dehaze, and we'll try and bring out some of the greens a bit with vibrance. Now, sharpening I'm going to put back because it's a Fuji. Okay, Fujis don't like the sharpening thing. And there's really not much else I need to do to it. Okay, we could take it into Photoshop and do some more with it if we wished. But just to give you an idea of what size this picture is, going back to the library, if I go back to the library and open this panel up here, and we look at the size of it, we have cropped it, because remember it cropped automatically, but it is now 18,200 pixels long and 6,000 pixels tall. So 18,000 pixels long means that this picture could be printed to at least 246 to at least 6 or 7 feet long, no problem at all, and maybe 2 foot deep. And if I take it into Photoshop, we can actually see what size it will print to. But I think that's quite a nice picture, given the circumstances in which it was taken, and given the fact that it is a panoramic picture and HDR, both done at the same time in the computer. I think that's quite remarkable, and that's one of the features of the new Lightroom.